Welcome to Lumen, a podcast that sheds light on mental health, relationships, and what it means to be human. I'm Christopher Mooney, LCSW.
And I'm Kenyon Phillips, LMSW. Each episode, we unpack psychological patterns that affect our relationships. No jargon, no judgment.
Just thoughtful conversations to help you understand yourself and others a little more clearly. So today, I thought we could talk about boundaries. Mm-hmm. And this came up, I was thinking about this yesterday quite a bit, and I was thinking about how much information is out there. And part of the reason that we
like social media
yeah, like part of the reason that we do this is to kind of like counter, you know, a lot of like kind of people just throwing these psychological ideas out
Bust
there.
some myths. And,
yeah. There's all this talk around boundaries. The other one, so there's a lot of terms, and I think this is actually good for us to get into over the next few weeks. But there's like people overuse or misuse the word gaslighting.
Yes.
They misuse the word narcissism. They misuse the term boundaries and just kind of like what that really means versus kind of, I think, how people all over the internet use it.
Right.
And then the other phenomenon that I would like to get into at some point is everyone kind of using online tools to determine whether they are neurodivergent and on the spectrum. Yeah. Because there's a lot of people that I hear saying, hey, I think I have autism spectrum disorder or Asperger's based on, you know,
an online assessment
or something that I saw somebody say online.
Mm-hmm.
And as a clinician, it's frustrating because I think, and you probably experience this too, and I know other clinicians do as well. It's frustrating because typically those diagnoses, we're not even making those diagnoses. Those diagnoses are made through a battery of psychological and neuropsychological testing.
Yeah.
And we know people who do that testing.
Like David.
Yeah. And it's Dr. David Rowe,
right?
United Assessment. And, you know, it's such a battery of tests, and it's so specific to make that determination that a quick TikTok survey is not how you're going to find out whether there's neurodivergence.
Maybe not the best means.
And so we're going to get into some of that today, talking about, you know, some of the issues around how this information is just being misused out there. Mm-hmm. But I really want to talk about boundaries and how important that is, because I think that it's something that gets misrepresented a lot. And boundaries are really important as a human being to have.
Yeah. So. There's this, I think the sort of pop culture version of boundaries that I keep seeing people talk about is like, I have boundaries if I'm cutting somebody off. Like, I just need to cut people off. Right. I need to say no. And then that's me practicing self-care. Mm-hmm. When in reality, it's like, it's not a wall.
No,
the boundary isn't this like insurmountable thing. It's fluid. I mean, boundaries the way we talk about them.
Right. Boundaries can be fluid.
Right.
They can be, and they're different depending on the person we're dealing with.
Yeah.
So boundaries with family members are different than maybe boundaries with colleagues at work. Mm-hmm. But you're right. Like I think it's kind of seen as almost like this personality trait, right? Like
this, like aggressive.
Yeah. Like, I have boundaries. Yeah. Kind of becomes this statement and this proclamation rather than this kind of like, you know, this kind of behavior and kind of understanding of where we begin and others end.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing to remember here is where we begin and others end. Mm-hmm. And how that can actually move depending on the relationship as well.
Absolutely.
So it's not this proclamation of hey, you know, I don't like what you said, so I'm going to cut you off, as you were saying. And I think we've seen a lot of this with, especially with politics, right? Since 2016, definitely I think politics. It was winding up before then.
Yeah.
But I think with cancel culture mm-hmm. and in a lot of political issues, and then in COVID, and just like this perfect storm, and when everybody's quarantining, of just saying, well, yeah, I don't like what you say, so I'm not going to listen to you anymore, and right. You don't exist.
And in fact, yeah, even if you're family, I'm right. going to cut you off.
I think especially in families that we see a lot of that happening is, I can't tolerate what you're saying. So therefore my boundary is I'm not going to listen to you anymore. I'm not going to basically even act as if you exist.
Right.
Which is, from a psychological standpoint, extremely negative and maladaptive.
It's
harmful.
It's so damaging. I was going to say, it just causes a lot of harm when we pretend people don't exist.
It comes from a place of trying to protect ourselves. I think when we think about making that statement of like, I have boundaries, or these are my boundaries, I think it does come from this place of trying to protect ourselves and insulate ourselves. And I'm wondering, in your experience, where have you seen that? Like, where people have tried to protect themselves with boundaries?
There are certainly like really healthy applications of boundaries within that context that you're talking about. For instance, if an adult child has been abused by a parent and they find themselves in an enmeshed relationship or a codependent relationship with that abusive parent, having a boundary with that parent and being able to say, hey, I'm not going to participate in this type of behavior or this relationship anymore. That's healthy. That comes up. It comes up with work so many times. And we've even talked about it in past episodes where an employee will have boundary issues with a boss or a supervisor or a manager where they're being essentially asked to do too much.
Right.
And they'll feel like, I need to assert a boundary here so that I can sort of like get my sense of agency back and get a sense of my life back. Those are two that come to mind right away.
Mm-hmm. So this idea of regaining a sense of agency, and we've talked about agency before, right? That idea that I have a say in my life. Is that
it's autonomy, agency, control.
Okay.
Control. I think so much maladaptive behavior stems from compulsion, desire, need to control other people. And I think as we get healthier, arguably, we realize the limitations of that. Like, wow, I really can't control other people, situations, circumstances, environments, but I can control. Boundaries is something that we do have autonomy over. We do have a control over. I love the Viktor Frankl quote from Man's Search for Meaning, the last of the human freedoms, to decide one's attitude, how we choose to view our circumstances. We can't control our circumstances. We may be in terrible circumstances.
Sure.
But we can effectively have a boundary. We can draw a boundary. Even if we feel completely powerless, when we really look at it, I think from a therapeutic standpoint, a boundary can be drawn so long as we're in our bodies and we have some agency. We have more agency perhaps than we think.
Yeah. And so in that case, when you're saying we draw a boundary, is that a hard line in the sand?
It can feel like that, especially if the person is dealing with, a past history of abuse or trauma of one form or another. Then, I think often a boundary does tend to look really, really, really rigid, not just a line in the sand, but like a wall.
Sure.
And I think what tends to happen as boundaries are lived in and we get some practice having boundaries, we realize that there can be some fluidity. It isn't necessarily something that has to stand for all time in its current state.
Right. And I think in the thing I like that you're highlighting here is, when we talk about that safety, right? And we think about that's a really good example and an explanation of how if we've been in danger, a boundary can be really protective.
Right.
I'm not going to entertain this anymore. I'm not going to allow this thing in. I'm not going to allow this to happen anymore, or this person, or whatever it was that was hurting us. It's interesting because I think a lot, and we've discussed, I think that one of the struggles we have as a culture and as a society now, what we see a lot of people dealing with is that everything everything is interpreted as a danger.
As a trigger.
And a trigger is another one of those words I think that gets misused.
Sure.
Right. And we can get into that, but people feel triggered. People feel They feel scared. I think there's a level of anxiety and an inability to tolerate some really uncomfortable things. And so I think that that's when we start looking at that. We realize that if everything looks dangerous to us, then that rigid boundary, that wall, becomes a very easy solution.
Absolutely.
It's not healthy. It's not healthy to walk through life thinking everything's dangerous either.
No, it's gonna. I mean, you're gonna deplete yourself. And the other thing is, we see the world not as it is. We see the world as we are. It's just the tendency. And so, if I am living with, for example, post-traumatic stress disorder, like a PTSD, where my past experiences, traumas are very much in the present for me, I'm going to view the world as a very hostile place, and I am going to draw those really rigid boundaries in order to protect myself. If I can view, if my sort of equilibrium is more balanced, if I'm viewing the world not as a hostile environment, but as a potentially friendly environment, a place where I feel comfortable and safe, then the boundaries can be, as I said before, a little bit more fluid,
right?
A little more healthy, a little healthier.
Exactly. So let's talk about a little bit. We'll kind of discuss what boundaries actually are.
Yeah.
Because this is really good. Kind of looking at like, hey, maybe here's some of the reason why we're throwing up these walls, and especially if we're talking about safety, we can get into maybe some of the experience of people not having boundaries. And how that can be a really open, or there's no wall at all.
Right.
But so boundaries they're kind of how we communicate. If we think about it, and it's boundaries are a clear statement about what we can hold and what we can't hold.
Yeah.
And we start looking at that in the way of like, it's kind of about, how we relate to other people in a relationship.
Yeah. They're behavioral.
Exactly. And so they help us regulate the information that we give out. They also help us regulate the information that we take in. And to be in a relationship, we have to have that flow. And that's any relationship. That can be an intimate relationship with a partner. That can be a friendship. That can be just with the cashier at the grocery store. So when we talk about relationships, I talk about like all human interaction.
Right.
And so boundaries are kind of the valve, I think, of how that information goes in and out.
Totally. And a framework as well. But the thing that I think can help when we're drawing boundaries and kind of defining boundaries for ourselves is to realize that, and this is a big insight for me, boundaries aren't really about other people's behavior. They're about, as you said, the valve. They're about a valve that we adjust in ourselves, in and of ourselves. And that's why I think, we were talking about autonomy. Boundaries are associated with autonomy. I can't control other people's behavior, but I can control how I respond to it.
Right.
And the degree to which I choose to participate or not.
It sounds, again, like you're saying that a person has to have a good understanding of themselves in order to make sure that valve is working correctly.
Absolutely. I think that's where boundaries really start. So much of the time, boundaries, we think we have to have boundaries as a reaction, and it starts with somebody else's behavior.
Remind me the difference between reacting and responding.
Reacting is, I'll use the overused word again, triggered. I'm in a state of high alert. I'm not really thinking. I'm reacting. Means it can be a compulsive or an impulsive reaction. It can be violent. It usually doesn't have a lot of thought involved. It's usually something that we regret later. How about, you step on my foot. I don't know you. I say, hey, watch where you're going. That's me reacting. You reacting to that is saying, you want to,
you want to go?
Yeah, you want to go. Let's go.
Like,
come at me, bro. Come at me. That's reacting. Responding is measured. There's usually a pause before a response, and a response is an autonomous, meaning a self-controlled way to, I'll be redundant, respond to a potential trigger, a potential stressor.
Right. And that's the goal.
Considered behavior.
Yeah. Considered behavior. We in all of this and all the things we talk about, I think we typically go back to we want response versus reaction.
Always.
Right. Reaction is it's that anxiety, fight or flight kind of like, oh my God, I'm in danger. Something happened. I got to fight back. Stress response. Yeah. And that's reaction. And response is, I'm going to think about, I'm going to use the human part of me, right? The reasonable part to respond to this and think about, oh, maybe I stepped on your foot by accident. Maybe I didn't see you there. Maybe I stumbled and accidentally bumped into you.
Yeah. And it's interesting how a response changes the environment immediately. It will affect, just like a reaction affects how the other person, gets in your face or not.
Yeah.
A response really chills people out.
Yeah, it allows for grace too. I think we talked a lot about grace. I've talked about it before. It's been the thing. I don't know why I've been on it lately, but
it's a great Jeff Buckley album.
Yeah, it is. I think that when we respond, we are considering grace. And again, having grace for ourselves and for other people is having a relationship with our limitations and expectations that we haven't met and being kind about that. So
patience, and compassion come with grace.
Those are amazing, amazing words. Patience and compassion. Yeah.
And how much we allow ourselves, how much we allow somebody else.
Yeah. Speaking of stepping on feet, one of the kind of boundaries that we can look at so we have physical boundaries. There's three different kinds of boundaries. There may be more, but we'll talk about these three. But there's physical boundaries, which are knowing, where our body is and where that ends, and kind of like what our space is around us and what level of touch we're comfortable with. And I think you kind of made reference to this before when you talk about survivors of abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, just any kind of violence, physical violence that we experience, or even it can be as simple as just somebody accidentally bumping into us on the subway. Right? We have a sense of our physical boundary. I think they say like our physical boundary, typically we need 3 feet of space around us, right? In order to walk around the world. Yeah. I remember living in New York that was not a possibility. The more people you cram into a space, the less boundary you get, physical boundary.
And it was so interesting. Like, I'm sure you had this experience. Get on a crowded subway train, and the tension is so high.
You can feel it.
Tension is so high. Inevitably, even if you're just going one stop, someone will say something to somebody, and there will be a
you can feel. It's funny. We lived in New York for almost 20 years. I was commuting in and out at least for 25 or almost 25. It was, I never realized until I went back after I left. So you get desensitized. And I think that's an important thing to recognize here. If you're constantly exposed to a lack of boundary, it changes. As you said, it's fluid. And so I remember going back in the first time after we left New York to be on the train, and it was like, oh, I don't like this. And then I was like, maybe that whole time I didn't like it, but I just became desensitized to it. Yeah. And then you get into the whole like, oh, that's probably why cortisol and everything else was like through the roof at the time. But I think that's it was just a funny thing to think about, is that tension that I felt though. That you're referencing. And every time I go back now, I feel it. I'm like, I have some autonomy and some agency. I don't have to live like that.
Yeah.
So,
but that's a wonderful, I think, example of a physical boundary.
Yeah.
Like that 3 feet of space.
Exactly. And I think it is important to think about this. Like, boundaries are not just, as I said, related to like some kind of physical assault or infraction upon, your freedom. They can just be everyday little kind of like experiences. And that over time, when we think about it, can be difficult and traumatizing and lasting in its effect. And again, I'm using the word trauma lightly there, kind of like one of those other words we
That's
kind of like
overused.
throw out there. But when you think about it, it's just consistent experience over time. Mm-hmm. It affects a change on us, for the positive or negative.
No, for sure, for sure. Emotional boundaries are another type of boundary that I think don't get talked about enough, but we need them.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about emotional boundaries and what your understanding is of that.
Having good emotional boundaries means we sort of like stay away from codependency. We tend an enmeshment. In other words, we don't take responsibility for other people's feelings.
That's codependency, right?
That's a part of codependency.
Okay.
Part of codependency and enmeshment means, if you have a bad day, I have a bad day. If you're happy, I'm happy.
Yeah, if you're feeling a way, then I'm going to have to feel that way too.
Right.
Kind of, right? Like that would be a lack of an emotional boundary, wouldn't it?
There's no boundary. And that's why I love the word enmeshment, because it literally describes that idea of like being caught in the net of somebody else.
Yeah.
The mesh of somebody
else. Totally.
But the thing about emotional boundaries is that they are the most commonly violated, even more, far more than like physical boundaries. And if you think about it, a funny sort of pop culture example is like the mom who makes you feel guilty.
Mm-hmm.
You're never cool, you're never right, and so anyone who sort of is pushing you or trying to manipulate you into having a guilt response, they're violating your emotional boundaries. Anytime someone is telling you how to feel.
Now that can be direct, like you need to feel this way. Why don't you feel this way? Why don't you feel bad about this? Or it can be more subtle, right?
Yeah.
Where it's almost a manipulation, or the feeling is kind of drawn out of you over time, over experience, right?
Absolutely. That's going back to that silly, guilt-inducing mother example. She could say something very direct, like, you should be ashamed of the fact that you haven't called me. Or she could take a more passive-aggressive, less direct approach, which works for a lot of people.
Of course.
Is to say, you call, "Oh, hi, Mom, how are you?" "Oh, well, I guess I'm all right."
Yeah. I've been sitting here. I've been wondering where you were, if you were going to call.
Yeah, I've just been concerned for your safety because you haven't called in, look, 3.5 weeks. And then, of course, I'm going to feel like, ooh.
I feel like that one's going to really hit with a few people.
Oh, I'm fine. I'm fine, though. I have my cookbooks. And then you're just like, I feel. But that's violating an emotional boundary. And a healthy emotional boundary says, hey, your feelings are yours. My feelings are mine. And I'm not responsible for how you feel. Doesn't mean I don't care about you.
Right.
I care about how you feel.
And my behaviors can have an impact on how you feel, but I'm not responsible for the feeling that takes place.
Right. Ultimately, we make our own decisions about how we feel. Mm-hmm. I love, that this is an idea borrowed from recovery, I think from 12-step recovery. There are no victims, only volunteers. There comes a point where there certainly are victims in this world. It's not to say that there
Absolutely.
aren't victims of violence and terrible things and manipulations of all sorts. There does come a point, I think, especially if somebody's on a mental health journey or a recovery journey, where we say, all right, I need to take control of my own life. I need to respond rather than react.
Mm-hmm. It is. And I think when I think about how that comes up maybe in conversations, sometimes in sessions, it's this idea of, at some point, our experiences, the outside feelings and voices become our voice.
Right.
We end up taking a lot of that on. So I think of that when you say, like, oh, there are no victims, there's only volunteers. Mm-hmm. And when we set aside, people who are victimized in some of those experiences, but this idea of, like, the boundaries, like, oh no, I don't have to allow those things. It doesn't have to be my voice.
Right.
If you're feeling a certain way about our interaction, I can take that into consideration.
Right.
But I have some say over that, and you have some say over that. And that's going back to this idea that boundaries are in fact communication. They are that kind of playground for communication. They help us regulate what goes in and out.
I love that because I think there's a tendency to be scared of boundaries or to be intimidated by them or angered by them.
Right.
Like, like a no trespassing.
Because we think of them as limits.
Yeah.
They're not limits.
Well, I love that when you think of it, when you conceive of them as a form of communication.
Right.
And a framework for having a healthy dynamic, a healthy relationship with somebody else.
That's a great word to explain it. Framework.
Yeah.
So the other boundary that we can get into is so we did physical, we have emotional boundaries, and then we have mental and intellectual boundaries.
Oh, yes.
And these are where we establish a right to our own thoughts, opinions, and beliefs. And it's different than feelings, right? Because when we think about like, I have right to whether I want to feel guilty. I have the right whether I want to feel sad or happy in a situation. But then we get into this idea that I have a right to my own opinion or belief. And this is actually where I think we get caught up more in what we see culturally right now.
With politics. Big time.
I don't believe in what you believe in, and I might think that you have a right to believe that, but now I don't believe that, so I'm just going to wall you off. And I think that that's where this actually really becomes dangerous and unhealthy.
Because what we need is connection. And if, as you say, which I endorse, boundaries are a form of communication, that means they're a bridge. And if we are taking ideology, which I think is the heart of these mental and intellectual boundaries, and using it as a sort of weapon, it's just awful because, like, you see it all the time. You shouldn't feel that. You shouldn't have that opinion.
Right. You shouldn't think that way. You shouldn't believe
that way. And if you don't think the way I think, then we can't be friends.
That's right. Or you are this.
Or you are this.
And fill in the whatever this might be.
Right.
You're too soft. You're pinko commie.
Right.
You're socialist.
Or you're a fascist.
Or you're a fascist. Or you're a Nazi.
Yeah.
Or you're racist.
I was on the phone with a friend yesterday, and he is more conservative than I am. We have a long-standing relationship. And he said at one point, he said, I believe about 80% of what you believe. And that 20% where we differ intellectually, ideologically, is not nearly enough for me to end my relationship with you, my friendship with you. And I hope it's not enough for you to end your relationship with me.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's I love that example, Kenyon. And I love that idea of 20% isn't enough to end this relationship. It's something that's a good question for people maybe to reflect on. What percentage is enough to end a relationship, right? What percentage of, and I think some of the complicating factors in that, what percentage of just, I don't believe the things you believe in is enough to not have this relationship? Or what percentage of unhealthy behavior? Because I think that differs, right? That's going to be, well, you're really unhealthy and hurtful being, it's like 10% of the time I can't be around that, but maybe I can tolerate 40% of your different opinions.
Right.
So I think that's where boundaries become complicated, but that we have to have a better understanding of ourselves, what we can handle. Remember, boundaries are it's how we understand what we can handle,
right?
And how much we can take on and how much we can't,
right? Because
as human beings, we need to be able to take on things that we don't like.
Absolutely. There has to be some room for discomfort.
Yeah, it can't all feel good all the time.
No.
In fact, I think life does not typically feel good all the time.
No. That's why we have shoes, outside shoes, and we don't wear slippers all the time. Although we do wear Uggs.
If you swing through the middle school and I drop my kid off, everybody's wearing Ugg slippers and pajama pants and hoodies. And I'm like,
you're right.
But then again, I think they're all too soft. So
They're all way too soft.
you kids are too soft these days. But we can't be comfortable all the time.
That's the thing. And a mental boundary is great because it creates a framework for that level of discomfort, and it contains it.
Yeah.
So if I have a mental boundary, I'm saying, hey, I'm allowed to think differently than you, and you're allowed to think differently than me. I don't need your approval or validation to think the way I do. You don't need mine.
Or to exist.
Exactly.
So what's so cool is that, and you're saying, oh, you don't need my approval in order to think a certain way, and I don't need yours. Yet we can still sit in the same room and have a conversation, or have a cup of coffee together, or ride the subway together.
Totally.
We could probably find something somewhere to have a discussion about.
Absolutely.
But that requires curiosity.
It does.
And it requires a pause to understand that you are allowed to exist and I am allowed to exist in our own kind of like silos.
Yeah.
But they're not walled off. They don't have to be, right?
Exactly. Again, there's that idea of the permeable boundary or the shifting boundary.
Exactly. When I started off in this field, when I first moved to New York, I was working at a substance abuse program, just outpatient program, intensive outpatient. And I remember running these groups, and I must have been 25. I barely knew what I was doing. I still don't really know what I'm doing, but like
the older I get, the less I know.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm more confident about it now though. Right. Then I was like, yeah, I know everything. But I remember talking about boundaries, and you know, the group of people that we were working with, they were people coming in early recovery where they had been through, you know, years after years after years of drug abuse and alcoholism. Right. And they had no idea about boundaries. And I remember getting up and drawing on the dry erase board, like, here are the 3 boundaries. You have a wall, you have a dotted line, and you have just openness.
Right.
In my little stick figure drawing. And I was like, this is the easiest way to remember this. We have solid, we have porous, and we have none.
Right.
We really want the porous one. I think of the ozone, right? I think of all these, or I think of like, I had to be a total dork here, like Star Trek. When we talk about resilience, we talk about boundaries are the same. It's like a force field around
that field. Yeah.
We don't want everything bouncing off. Then we're walled off. We're cold. We don't allow things in, and we don't allow things out.
Right.
We want like a screen. Like you open your window, you don't want all the bugs and mosquitoes coming in. You want the nice fresh air.
Yeah.
That's how I look at boundaries. We want like a new screen that doesn't allow all the bugs in. It's not all cloudy and weird and old. It's like a nice new one. You could see through it really well. Yeah. And we still get that fresh air. And then we get to yell out to our neighbors, "Hey, how you doing?" Like out the window.
I love that. Is again, it's great because it's a conception, a conceptualization of a boundary, not as something that's dire, that's dangerous, that's fraught with conflict.
Right.
I think so many people equate boundaries to conflict, but here you're saying, no, it's the opposite. It's a way to connect with other people.
That's right.
And interact.
And keeping on the window screen analogy, you have the ability to slide it open.
Right.
And hand your neighbor a chocolate chip cookie. Absolutely. Or not. Or be like, yeah, sorry, no cookies for you.
No cookies for you and no soup.
Or shut your window very quickly.
Right.
Yeah, maybe that happens. Maybe sometimes you're like, yeah, I don't like what I see out there, so I'm going to close the window.
It does happen.
Briefly. But it's not painted shut.
No.
And I think that's the important part of this is like we get to have control. There's that agency that you were talking about before. We get to have control over the window.
Right.
That has the screen.
Yeah. No, it's huge.
Yeah. There's some other boundaries that we can kind of...
There's one that I want to call out because it's a tough one for me, and that's a temporal boundary, the boundary of time.
Sure.
And it's the idea of like having a time boundary, a temporal boundary is how do we protect our time, our energy, our resources? Sort of the idea that, hey, we are a limited resource. Saying no to something that's going to deplete me, really tough for me. I want to say yes. We've talked about this in other episodes. I want to say yes to everything and to everybody because I'm a dreamer and I and I get excited. But the reality is it's like, we do need these time boundaries because we can't always be just perpetually available. We can't say yes to everything.
Because we do have time. We are bound by time.
We are bound by time. Everybody is. And, so again, people pleasing, it's tough for people pleasers to have these kinds of boundaries around time, but they're essential because when they're violated, somebody else's emergency becomes ours. And it's kind of like you're living somebody else's life.
Absolutely.
And so I think it's, again, I think that's an important one to call out. Our time is precious. Our time is a resource. And it's important to, I think, understand that. I was going to say protect it, but just to understand it.
I think, protect it almost seems like it's, you gotta, it's I like that. But to understand it, it's finite, right? I mean, it's so what I think about. I had this mentor in school, this professor, and he told us, he goes, sessions begin and end on time.
Yeah.
And that's okay if things are not resolved. Then we get into like emotional boundaries, and it's funny how the time boundary, the temporal boundary, actually starts to affect these other things, right? Like you talked about people pleasing, how that people pleasing affects your time boundary, but it affects then those feelings of guilt are emotional boundaries.
Yeah.
If I stop this thing right now because I'm bound by time, this other person might start to feel a certain way about me.
Right.
And remember, like when we were talking about emotional boundaries, like, because you feel a certain way about me, then I feel a certain way.
Right.
That it goes the other way too. It's a two-way street. If I feel a certain way, then you must feel this way. And that's a cognitive distortion. That's an unhelpful thinking style, right?
Totally.
That's that projection again.
Yeah.
So, but I think about that as like, if I tell a friend, if I'm out getting coffee with somebody, I say, you know what, actually, I got to go. They might be sad. They might be disappointed. They might feel let down. Actually, probably not. They're probably like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I got to go too.
Yeah.
That's the reality of it. But that pang of guilt or worry or sadness or even shame sometimes that we might have over setting a boundary about time, that's something that we need to understand, and that's a good exercise. I think a lot of people actually probably struggle with time boundary, as you were saying.
I have struggled with it my whole life.
Yeah.
And, you mentioned sessions. Like my sessions are notorious for running late, like, because I'll get caught, especially if something's intense.
Yeah.
I see it with like timekeeping at, meetings, support groups. If there's, the way those things function is with a container. People can't be allowed to just talk, if it's sharing, there does need to be a time limit. Usually it's 3 minutes. And, it can be tough to be the timekeeper and have to say, sorry, your time's up.
It can be. The last program I worked for, the owner of the program would come in, he was so, he drove this home, and he was so on point with this. He's like, and he said it the same exact way. We need a container. Meetings, you have to have somebody that contains every meeting, every interaction you have, especially when you're dealing with a group of people. His joke was always we had to have the structure because it's a bunch of social workers all around a table at the same time, and if you want to put a bunch of people who need time and constraints,
right.
Put a bunch of therapists around a table, and they're just going to figure it out, and it feels good. And this was always his joke about it. It was like, oh yeah, it's just, you're all going to walk into a room and think that you're just going to figure it out, and there's no container, there's no structure, there's nothing. We need it.
Yeah.
Because it really helps, and it helps move things, and it's so much better. It made us all feel better having a container and having that structure. And it does in support groups. It does everywhere, because then I know what my expectations are.
Exactly.
No anxiety about that. Okay, I can get boom, boom, boom. Here's what I want to say. It's done. It's out.
Yeah. No, there's a safety in that.
Yeah. So I want to go back and just talk about maybe where a lot of what we see online, where this is kind of getting it, where it was getting it wrong.
TikTok therapy.
Yeah, TikTok therapy. And where maybe where we need to just reiterate where this is right.
Right.
And, I think that when we look at boundaries as cutoffs, that's not healthy. We're not looking at like blocking someone, ending a relationship, going no contact. They can be the right choice for safety. They can be the right choice in your life. And please, I'm not telling people not to block people or to cut people off if they need to.
Who feel harmful. Right.
But it's not a boundary. So let's not call it a boundary. We call it what it is. I'm blocking this person because I can't tolerate how they live their life, what they say, or the impact it has on me.
It's a decision. It's a behavior.
That's exactly it.
Or I'm making a decision. Right. I'm not drawing a boundary.
Right. A boundary in that situation would be it's going to keep a door available. So when we have a boundary where there's a door. Now we can close it. Yeah. But we could say so a good example of this is if you speak to me that way, I'm going to leave the conversation. So you're giving out a warning. You're giving out this kind of saying, I don't like this. This is actually encroaching on my boundaries. If you continue this way, I'm going to leave. Right. Now that's different than just slamming the door and going no contact or ghosting, if you will.
Yeah. But no, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
And you're giving somebody a framework within which to continue a conversation with you.
That's right.
It's not about ending things. It's like, hey, I really want to keep talking. In order for us to keep talking, I need this.
Yeah. You're setting the stage, setting that framework. I love you've used that word a few times today. I love the word framework today.
Yeah.
It's this structure that we have to use.
Yeah. It's useful for me.
Boundaries is a preference. My boundary is I don't discuss my weight or my beliefs about something. And if it's a topic you don't want to engage in, that's fine. But it's just not the same as a boundary. It's just a topic.
It's a preference.
It's a preference.
Yeah.
That's all.
I prefer not. I think of Bartleby the Scrivener.
That's right.
Herman Melville short story.
That's right.
Bartleby, will you do this job? I'd prefer not.
I'd prefer not.
He's not saying no.
He's just talking about his preference.
He's just saying,
I don't like that versus I can't.
There's so many things I engage with that I need to engage in that I don't like, but I have to do them.
That's right.
I have to.
We got to go through it.
I have to do laundry.
I don't want to do the dishes.
Right.
But actually, that's not true. I love actually doing the dishes.
That chills me out. Though.
But yeah.
But when I see a sink full of dirty dishes, I get stressed. So
exactly. And then the other one is boundaries without discomfort. Like this whole kind of wellness idea is that it implies once you state it clearly, the other person respects it and you feel great. That's not always how it works.
Not at all in my family. It's like training a puppy. Like the boundary's introduced and then the boundary needs to be redrawn. And I've found that it needs to be redrawn with compassion rather than, a firm hand.
It's the cost of doing what we call the work.
Yeah.
When we talked about people pleasing, I remember I had said that the withdrawal symptom of stopping people pleasing is guilt.
Yeah.
It's the same thing here. When we set a boundary, it doesn't mean we set a boundary and we're good. And it feels great. I set a boundary and look at me.
Yeah.
You might get a little charge out of it, but boundaries are really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because we're dealing with a relationship and because the other person just might not get it. It doesn't mean they're mean. It doesn't mean they're trying to be hurtful. It doesn't mean that they are awful.
Yeah, stupid.
It can. They could be mean or awful.
Yeah.
Right? But we have to help others understand what our boundary is. That's our responsibility in a relationship. How do I express to the other person kind of how I move through the world and how do I understand that for myself?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks for listening to Lumen. If today's conversation resonated with you, we encourage you to follow, review, and share Lumen with anyone you think would appreciate it.
We'll be back soon with another conversation designed to bring a little more light to the human condition. I'm Christopher Mooney, LCSW.
And I'm Kenyon Phillips, LMSW.
Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Lumen is for educational and informational purposes only and is not a substitute for therapy, diagnosis, or treatment. If you're experiencing a mental health crisis, please contact local emergency services or a trusted mental health professional.